Prince had rented out the entire top floor of Le Jules Verne restaurant in the Eiffel Tower. It was September 23, 1996, and Paris was bathed in that golden autumn light that makes the city feel like a painting. He'd flown Claire Dubois here on his private jet, telling her only that he wanted to celebrate the success of the Emancipation album with someone who understood what freedom actually meant. Claire, a 34-year-old French literature professor at the Sorbonne who'd met Prince 6 months earlier at a bookstore in Minneapolis, had no idea what was about to happen. She knew Prince was infatuated with her. She knew their connection was deep and real. But when Prince got down on one knee in front of the Paris skyline with a purple diamond ring, Claire did something nobody expected. She said no. And what she said next became the most brutally honest conversation about the cost of loving someone the world refuses to let belong to just one person. Prince had met Claire in the most Prince way possible. Randomly, unexpectedly, in a place where he wasn't supposed to be recognized. He'd walked into a small independent bookstore in Minneapolis at 11 p.m., wearing his usual disguise of baseball cap and sunglasses. The store was nearly empty except for one woman sitting in the philosophy section, completely absorbed in a book. Prince watched her for a moment, intrigued by how lost she was in whatever she was reading. "Excuse me," Prince said, approaching her. "What are you reading that's so captivating?" Claire looked up, barely registering the man in the cap. "Kierkegaard. Either/or. It's about the aesthetic life versus the ethical life, about whether we can live authentically while performing for others." Prince sat down in the chair next to her. "That's exactly what I've been thinking about for years." They talked for 3 hours that night. Claire didn't recognize Prince, or, if she did, she didn't care. She engaged with his ideas, challenged his thinking, treated him like a normal person having a philosophical conversation. When the bookstore closed, Prince revealed who he was. Claire's response was perfect. "I know, I figured it out an hour ago. But you seem to be enjoying being anonymous, so I didn't mention it." That began a 6-month relationship unlike any Prince had experienced. Claire wasn't impressed by fame. She didn't want access to his world. She was a serious academic who'd lived in Paris, London, and New York, who spoke 4 languages, who'd published 2 books on existentialism and modern identity. She challenged Prince intellectually in ways nobody had in years. Their dates were visits to museums, late-night conversations about philosophy and art, walks through parks discussing Sartre and Camus. Claire made Prince feel like a person instead of a symbol. But there was a tension underlying everything. Claire lived in Paris and only visited Minneapolis occasionally for academic conferences. Prince lived everywhere and nowhere, constantly touring, recording, performing. Their relationship existed in stolen moments between his obligations and her life. And Claire was always clear. "I'm not interested in being part of your world. I'm interested in you when you step out of that world and become just Prince Rogers Nelson." Prince had never been so challenged. Every woman he'd dated had eventually become absorbed into his orbit, attending his shows, living by his schedule, existing in his universe. Claire refused. She had her own career, her own identity, her own life that didn't revolve around him. And paradoxically, that made Prince fall deeper in love than he'd ever been. She was the one thing in his life he couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't make bend to his will. So Prince planned the proposal in Paris, Claire's home city, thinking the romantic gesture would show her he understood her world. He'd prepared a speech about how she'd changed him, how she'd reminded him that Prince the performer and Prince the person could coexist, how he wanted to build a life with someone who saw him instead of the legend. The ring was custom designed, a purple diamond surrounded by smaller stones, beautiful and tasteful, but unmistakably Prince. "Claire," Prince said, kneeling in front of her as the Eiffel Tower sparkled behind them through the restaurant windows, "you've shown me what it means to be loved for who I am, not what I represent. I want to spend my life having the conversations we have. I want to wake up next to someone who challenges me to be more than my music. Will you marry me?" The silence that followed felt eternal. Claire looked at the ring, at Prince, at the romantic setting he'd created. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of something more complicated. "Prince, I need you to stand up," she said softly. Prince's heart sank, but he stood. Claire took both his hands. "What I'm about to say is going to hurt you, but I'm saying it because I love you enough to be honest rather than kind." Claire took a breath. "I can't marry you. Not because I don't love you, I do, more than I expected to, but because I've watched what happens to people who love you, and I can't be that person." Prince started to interrupt, but Claire held up her hand. "Please let me finish." "This is hard enough," she continued. "When we met, you asked me what Kierkegaard meant about living authentically while performing for others. Do you remember?" Prince nodded. "Well, here's what I've learned in these 6 months. You can't. You can't be Prince the global icon and Prince my husband. The world won't let you. And more importantly, you won't let you." Prince looked confused. "What do you mean?" Claire's answer was devastating in its clarity. "I mean that every time we're together, there's always a part of you that's performing. Not consciously, not maliciously, but you've been Prince for so long that you don't know how to stop. Even in our most intimate moments, there's a part of you aware of how you're being perceived, how you're managing your image, how you're controlling the narrative." "That's not true," Prince protested. "With you, I'm just myself." Claire shook her head sadly. "No, my love. Even this proposal, as beautiful as it is a performance. You've rented out the Eiffel Tower. You've created this grand romantic gesture. You've written a speech. This is Prince proposing marriage, as Prince would, with all the resources and drama and spectacle that being Prince allows. But what I need, what I've always needed, is just a person. Not a legend trying to be a person." Prince sat down heavily in his chair. "So what are you saying? That I'm not capable of being normal?" Claire sat next to him. "I'm saying that marrying you would mean entering a world where I'd cease to be Claire. I'd become Prince's wife. Everything I do would be filtered through that lens. My career would be secondary. My identity would be absorbed. And I've worked too hard to become who I am to let that happen, even for someone I love. But I wouldn't ask you to give up your career," Prince said desperately. "You could still teach, still write." Claire smiled sadly. "Could I? Really? You tour 9 months a year. You record at all hours. You live in a compound in Minneapolis, where you work constantly. Where do I fit in that? Do I follow you around the world, watching from the wings? Do I stay in Paris and see you occasionally between albums? Do I move to Paisley Park and become another person in your creative universe?" Prince had no good answer because Claire was right. His life was incompatible with the kind of partnership she was describing. "I could change," Prince offered. "I could tour less, perform less." Claire's response was gentle but firm. "And you'd resent me for it. The music is who you are. Asking you to do less of it would be asking you to be less yourself. And I wouldn't do that to you." "Then what do we do?" Prince asked, his voice breaking. "Do we just end this?" Claire took his hand. "We love each other honestly. We acknowledge that some loves aren't meant to become marriages. We accept that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them remain who they are instead of trying to fit them into your life." Prince pulled his hand away, hurt turning to anger. "So that's it? You're just giving up? All those conversations about authenticity and connection and understanding each other, and you're just walking away?" Claire's patience was remarkable. "I'm not walking away from you. I'm walking away from becoming someone I'm not. There's a difference." What she said next became the most quoted part of their conversation, words Prince would later reference in multiple songs. "Prince, you don't want a wife. You want a witness. You want someone who sees the real you and validates that he exists. But being a witness to someone's life isn't the same as sharing a life with them. I can bear witness to who you are. I can love the person I see when you're just Prince Rogers Nelson sitting in a bookstore talking about philosophy. But I can't share a life with Prince the icon who belongs to millions of people and only comes home occasionally to remember he's human. Prince was crying now, something Claire had only seen once before. So 6 months of this was what? Just you studying me like I'm one of your philosophy books? Testing whether I could be normal enough for you? Claire was crying too. No. It was me falling in love with someone extraordinary and realizing that extraordinary people come with costs. And I'm not strong enough to pay those costs. I'm not strong enough to compete with the world for pieces of you. I'm not strong enough to watch you give everything to your art and your fans and your legacy and hope there's something left over for me. The honesty was brutal, but it was also the most real conversation Prince had ever had about what it meant to be him. Most people in his life, from band members to management to romantic partners, eventually accommodated themselves to his needs, his schedule, his world. Claire was the first person who looked at that world and said, "This is beautiful, but it's not for me. And I love you enough to say that instead of pretending I can make it work." They sat in silence for a long time, the dinner growing cold, the Eiffel Tower sparkling outside. Finally, Prince spoke. "So what happens now?" Claire's answer was simple. "Now you go back to being Prince. You make the music the world needs from you. You inspire millions of people. You change lives. And occasionally, when you need to remember that Prince Rogers Nelson still exists underneath all of that, you call me. And we'll talk about books and philosophy and what it means to live authentically. But we won't try to be something we can't be." "Can I ask you something?" Prince said. Claire nodded. "If I wasn't Prince, if I was just a music teacher or a session musician or anything normal, would you marry me then?" Claire's answer was immediate. "In a heartbeat. Because then you'd be choosing me. But you can't choose me without unchoosing millions of people who need your music. And I won't make you do that." Prince put the ring box back in his pocket. They finished dinner with forced conversation about lighter topics, both pretending their hearts weren't breaking. When Prince dropped Claire at her apartment later that night, she kissed him one last time. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" Prince asked. "For asking. For loving me enough to imagine a life together. For being willing to try. That means more than you know." The aftermath of the Paris proposal was profound for Prince. He called the rejection the most important no I ever received in an interview years later, though he never revealed who'd said it. He wrote extensively about the experience, with songs on 3 subsequent albums dealing with themes of love versus possession, witnessing versus owning, and the loneliness of being loved for what you represent rather than who you are. Claire kept her word. She and Prince maintained an irregular correspondence for the rest of his life. Every few months, Prince would call late at night, and they'd talk for hours about books, ideas, life. Claire never attended his concerts, never visited Paisley Park, never became part of his world, but she remained the one person who knew Prince Rogers Nelson as separate from Prince the icon. When Prince died in 2016, Claire received a package from his estate. Inside was the purple diamond ring he'd tried to give her 20 years earlier, along with a note in Prince's handwriting. "You were right about everything. Thank you for loving me enough to say no. This belongs to you anyway, even if you never wore it. It represented the only time I genuinely tried to choose one person over the world. That's worth something, even if it couldn't work." Claire never remarried. In interviews after Prince's death, she spoke about their relationship with the same honesty she'd brought to that Paris dinner. People asked if she regretted saying no, if she wished she'd tried to make it work. Her answer was always the same. "I don't regret protecting my identity." And Prince wouldn't have wanted me to. He fell in love with someone who knew herself. If I'd lost that to become his wife, I wouldn't have been the person he loved anymore. The story of Prince's rejected proposal teaches us something crucial about love, identity, and the costs of loving extraordinary people. We romanticize the idea of loving legends, of being chosen by someone the world adores. But Claire understood what that actually meant: the loss of self, the subordination of your identity to someone else's legend, the loneliness of sharing someone with millions. Her no wasn't rejection of Prince, it was protection of Claire. And paradoxically, that made it the most loving thing she could have done for both of them. Some loves aren't meant to become marriages. Some connections are meant to remain what they are, perfect in their limitations, meaningful in their boundaries, important precisely because they don't try to become something they can't sustain. Prince and Claire had that, a love that existed in bookstores and phone calls and philosophical conversations, untainted by the compromises and resentments that would have inevitably come from trying to merge incompatible lives. Prince never stopped loving Claire. But he also never stopped being Prince. And in the end, she was right. He couldn't choose one person without unchoosing millions. The music demanded everything. The legend required constant feeding. And the man underneath occasionally needed someone to remind him he still existed. That was what Claire gave him. Not marriage, not partnership in the traditional sense, but witness. The validation that Prince Rogers Nelson, the person, was real and worthy of love, separate from the icon. Sometimes, that's all we can give each other. And sometimes, that's enough.